Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts, and every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot.
She doesn't remember the first time she landlocked cursed. Maybe it was the wet in the voice of an uncle, not a sailor, but in love with his boat of a car. He had no legs for land, she could tell that. Maybe it was the oil-dirty words he used to talk about the Cadillac that she knew were mouth-sized love, public but unknowable, intimate for all to jealous see. She whispered to make her mouth her own, thinking these were things that her mother would not say. This was how she could change the content and the shape of her face, not just the order and arrangement of her resignation. And around her small friends, she felt grown in the tongue, like a person who knew things that she had no way to know. And in church, she felt guilty and repented every week. She was playing prophet to her own scandalous adulthood. She was praying for it, calling it forth, like her girl future could be slick, like she would slide through days uninhibited into the next. But she was wrong. Curse on her lips notwithstanding, she could not escape the rhythm of traction and sand of creating the world every day with her hands, just like the women her uncle gas tank sailed away from. She could have spit, but she just sucked her teeth.
Welcome to Left of Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. We're here at the John Hope Franklin Center. We're joined today by Alexis Pauline Gumbs, reading from her new book, Spill, Scenes of Black Feminist Fugitivity. Alexis Pauline Gumbs is a poet, independent scholar, and activist. She is also the co-editor of Revolutionary Mothering, Love on the Front Lines, and founder and director of Eternal Summer of the Black Feminist Mind. How are you doing, Alexis?
I'm doing great. I'm really happy to be here.
Congratulations on the new book. And let's start there for a second. I mean, you're someone who has carved out a space, some would say on the margins of the academy, but this is a Duke University press. You know, what we have witnessed with your career arc is a very serious kind of inside-outside game where you remain absolutely rooted to life outside the academy, but still have viability within the academy. I mean, talk about your own thinking about your career trajectory so far, the activism versus the education piece, the intellectual piece, and carving out what, you know, in many ways is a unique space in the academy at this point in time.
Absolutely. You know, I think I ultimately see that as part of my role, right? So I am obsessed with what June Jordan calls, in a tribute to Audre Lorde, thousands of pages of thousands of books, right? Like I'm that type of person. It's one of June Jordan's description of being a West Indian. So I definitely fall into that. And at the same time, I want to be in and be with the ideas in those texts, especially Black feminist texts that I find most important, with my whole community, which is a community that doesn't necessarily always read the same book over and over again as their practice, doesn't necessarily use the jargon and discourse of the academy in everyday life. But as I've said before, Black feminist theory is complicated. Black feminist theory from somebody like Hortense Spillers, who's one of my favorite folks, that's also psychoanalytic and that's also engaging all of the European theorists that exist, is certainly complicated, but it's not more complicated than the lives of Black women. It's not more complicated than the lives of Black queer folks, and it's not more complicated than the lives of Black folks in general. So there has to be a way for the complexity that drives Black feminist theory to be accessible to everybody who is living that complication. And so for me, Spill is an experiment with that. Spill is like, if I can't get everybody to come over in my living room and just read Hortense Spillers out loud with me, which let's say maybe I've tried, then what is it that allows us, though, to honor her connection to this community as a prophet, I think, as, you know, in a preacherly tradition? How do we do that?
I mean, it's funny. I mean, it's not funny, but it is funny, right? Because, you know, Hortense, and we all love Hortense, but she's not the most accessible scholar, right? And there's a real challenge. I mean, some of us think about that challenge just in the classroom, right? How do we take high theory, right, and apply that to undergraduate, even graduate students? But I mean, you're taking it that step further. You know, what does Hortense Spillers look like in the public square?
Absolutely.
And so the play on her name, right? But also this idea of the way that Black feminism really just spills, right? It spills out, it spills over, it splatters, it's just there, right? There's a kind of everydayness to it that I think you tap into in the context of the book.
Absolutely. I mean, I think Spillers herself creates the portals for that, right? Like there's moments in these high theoretical texts where she talks about how you don't get up in somebody's face like that, right? And I saw those as moments where she's reminding all of us, where does this come from?
Right.
Where does the impetus of this come from? And so intergenerationally, I think about Hortense Spillers doing the project that she did with all of those essays that are in black, white, and color.
Right.
She was taking a particular stance within the fields that were important to her to intervene and to say, you can't talk about any of this without talking about the complexity of Black women. And at this moment, that makes it possible for me to say, okay, excellent. So that was a protest act in all of these essays where she was specifically having an audience within the academy that she wanted to transform.
Yeah.
But she also made a way for all of those conversations and all of those ideas to become, well, to really resonate where they did come from, which is in the wider expanse of Black community.
You mentioned that this is a text that's experimental, and in many ways, the way it's laid out, it reminds me of some of the Black arts poetry, the stuff that Sonia Sanchez was doing, Hakeem Aboudi was doing. Why was it important to take an experimental route at this particular moment? You know, because there are ways in which it feels even hip hop without being hip hop, but in terms of the kind of looseness of the form. You know, talk about why you chose that route at this point in time, right? Because you could have been accessible but not experimental, right?
That's true.
Right.
That's
Why
true.
choose the experimental route?
Yeah, I think that, first of all, it is definitely influenced by the Black arts movement poets. It's definitely influenced by hip hop. I mean, some of the passages, I heard them in rhyme. You know, they're rhythmic, and that does a particular type of work. The repetition work that Black poets have been doing, where you say different words, but because of the rhythm and the rhyme, it's almost like you're living that same moment over and over again. To me, that has something to say about fugitivity, about like, what does it mean to escape in a context that's the same, or what does it mean to make it look like we're in the same moment, but really you're traveling back and forth through time. And so for me, part of the experimentality of it was also thinking about, okay, I have this community of accountability I'm thinking about in terms of accessibility, but I also see Black feminist theorists within the academy and who publish and think about theory as part of that community. And my question for us was, what does it mean to be with Hortense Spillers? What does it mean to write with Hortense Spillers? How is that different than writing about Hortense Spillers? Or how is it different than writing about the literary characters that Hortense Spillers writes about? How can we have a writing with? And that was the experiment, because at the same time that I'm figuring out how do I be with all of my community with our different literacies, also how can we be with this work in a way that honors how intimate it is at the same time that it's macro, you know, how specific and everyday it is at the same time that it is high theory.
Ebony Marshall Turman, she talks about being a public theologian. You know, using that logic for a second, I mean, you are a public feminist. What does it mean to do that project? You know, and you're doing it in very broad ways, right? It's not just in the written word, right? I mean, you're doing organizing, you're literally creating physical and spiritual space for folks, you know, to engage feminism, right? Whether it's with the mobile homecoming, the idea of feminism being mobile in a literal sense of the word. Talk about what it means to be a public feminist.
I think it means availability. I mean, I've used the term community accountable, intellectual, community accountable artist, because I'm always, and this is what my grandparents taught me, I'm always listening for what is it that my communities need from me? What is it that I specifically can offer my communities that maybe somebody else couldn't offer because of whatever it is, what side of the street I happen to live on, or what I happen to have access to. And since I have this obsessive intimacy and, archival digging and, all of this in relationship to the Black feminist literary tradition specifically, I see myself similar to that person in the community who is that DJ that knows what song to play to get to heal us through a particular moment, right? I'm available in that way. So anything that the archive that I'm bringing through my existence, it's available to that, which means being creative. Because what does that mean when the availability is to 4-year-olds? What does it mean when that availability is to folks who've been specifically denied access to institutional forms that have to do with literacy? How do we still do that? So to me, I like that public feminist means being available, like making it explicit. Everything I have access to is to be shared, and that Black feminism has saved my life. And so everything that has saved my life, I know can be shared with my community.
I first met you 12 years ago, and I used to joke with you that I would go to conferences and folks would go, "Oh, you're from Duke, so you know Alexis Gumbs," right? Which was the moment where I kind of look, okay, she's like big time, like already. But it was a very different landscape back then, right? You go to 2016, and I can look at Black men like Michael Denzel Smith, Darnell Moore. I can look at Kiese Layman. Men who unabashedly, define themselves as feminist. What do you think has changed in the landscape over these last 12 years, right? I mean, there's so much conversation, obviously, with the recent election, but just generally speaking around toxic masculinity. But there are as many, I would argue, as many men talking publicly, critiquing toxic masculinity than there are folks that we traditionally think about as kind of feminist thinkers. I mean, what has changed over those last 12 years?
Yeah, wow, I think a lot has changed. I was thinking of my dad, who designed my Chucks that I'm wearing right now, and he's one of our most recent ancestors. But he came to identify as a queer Black feminist. I remember he was reading my dissertation, and he was like, he would Facebook message me what page he was on in my dissertation, and then he was like, I had to read it again because it's long and relatively dense. But he would say that there was a moment that he realized that without what Black feminists have been asking for this whole time, he would never be free. Right. Nobody he knew could be free, right? He realized that it was so applicable to his own life that he would be the one on social media before me clapping back at people who were saying things that didn't include a Black feminist perspective. And I'd be like, okay, let him do that work. And I think that, these other brothers who I love too, who you've mentioned, they see that, they see a vision. Now, Black feminists have always been including Black men in their vision, their vision of the future, and I think it's really beautiful to see how through mentorship, how through conversation and through reflection, there's been this moment where Black men can say, "Oh, a Black feminist vision is not only convenient, it's not only trendy or something like that, but it actually makes possible the world that I want to live in with all the people I love."
We share a mentor and inspiration who, as we're taping this now, is flying to Johannesburg for the Black Portraitures Conference. But of course, this is Alexis DeVoe. Could you talk a little bit about her influence on you as a thinker?
I laugh because about a week ago, I told my dad, after meeting Alexis DeVoe, was like, "Well, you must be named after her," right? which I identify with. I feel like that's true. I first learned about Alexis DeVoe in two ways. I was doing research in the Lesbian History Archives, and I saw these flyers for the Flamboyant Ladies, which basically is what I'm dressed like. It's like the big hair with some big earrings, and they're having some performance that's gonna end the possibility of nuclear war in a living room somewhere. I was like, this is everything, and I felt so affirmed by it. And then my mentor, Cheryl Green, talked about their exploits at Essence Magazine, how they were public feminists in the sense that they were saying, this is a fashion and beauty magazine, but we know that it's in all the beauty shops in the United States. And so we want to be talking about a third world solidarity. We want to be talking about revolution in Zimbabwe.
Which is an amazing way to think about a mainstream magazine.
Absolutely.
Right? You know, my introduction to Audre Lorde, you know, was a curated conversation with Lorde and Baldwin in the pages of Essence magazine, which, you know, was laying on my mother's bed. So they were doing some very real feminist work that folks didn't even recognize. You know, whole generations of folks introduced to feminism reading Essence magazine in the early 80s. Right?
Yes. It's a by every means approach. So I see that tradition. I mean, Alexis DeVoe saying, yes, her living room would be a salon space where these things would happen. They were going to make T-shirts that were about like every question that is important to Black folks. You know, I think that that's, so when you ask about, okay, what type of role am I playing? In a way, it is somewhat queer to my generation's relationship to the academy, but it's also in such a deep and strong tradition of Black feminist praxis.
We're at a renewed moment of an assault on Black humanity, brown humanity, queer humanity, immigrant humanity. In the midst of all of this, what are the 5 texts? And I'm thinking text broadly. We could be talking music, we could talk stage, visual art. You know, what are the 5 texts that you have gone to
at this time.
To work through this particular moment that we're dealing with?
Wow. That's a deep question because there's so many. There's so many necessary texts.
For the person who loves thousands of pages
and thousands of books. Exactly. So I'm thinking about, really, I've turned to the music of Jason Moran at this time, kind of reintroduced by a beautiful composition that he made in tribute to Toni Morrison just like maybe a week ago. And I was like, this brother, you know, I had to go back and listen to everything. So I can't even tell you which album. I was like, all of them, really appreciating that sound. You know, like what is it in a moment where the words seem to kind of like clank and fall and people are trying to find something smart to say? What is the sound of being Black humanity, of being human in motion? So that came immediately to mind. You know, there's so much. The thing about the period that I study is it's these Black feminists who are dealing with Reaganism, right? And so all of it's relevant, right? I think that I would definitely say that Blue Heat by Alexis DeVoe is an important text where she realizes that in the backlash against artists that comes after the rise of Reagan, that even though she's been published by major presses, she needs to think about self-publishing differently. And these anti-imperialist poems, also her close friend, June Jordan. Living room is really important right now in terms of June Jordan thinking about what's a vision for us to be together, what's a vision that looks at a world community that really is about the intimacy of living room, but at the same time a politics
that's not about likes and retweets.
Exactly, that level. Okay, so what's that, 3? Audre Lorde's, okay, I'm like, of all the things, Audre Lorde's Outlines, these are 2 poems, so I'm trying to like do 2 for 1. The poem Outlines, because that's the poem where she says, you know, if we lose, the blood of women will run in the streets. But if we win, there is no telling, right? It's this futurist poem that she offers about how real can we be in our relationships with each other. And in that poem, she's talking about her own relationship with a white woman who's like her partner at the time. How real can we be in our relationships with each other because the entire future is at stake in that. I think that's an important poem for this time. And then on my way out, I passed over You and the Verrazano Bridge by Audre Lorde. She talks about how the future is mapless and uncertain, but that our relationships are necessary as water. Right? And in this time, of course, we're thinking about water specifically with the Dakota Access Pipeline and, you know, Standing Rock folks, and also with the poisoning of the water in urban communities, you know, all of what is going on. So I think that adds up to 5 texts.
What's next for you, Alexis?
Oh my goodness, what's next? Well, it's great to be sharing Spill. I've been enjoying activating it as an oracle and really just opening to a page, or sometimes I let somebody choose a number and really being with that particular page. So it's been great to share that in different communities and to use it as healing, especially with women of color, Black and Indigenous women and people of color. That's been really exciting. What's happening with us with the mobile homecoming is that it's living room, actually. We're like, it's time for living room. And so we are building a retreat center, one living room and one tiny house at a time. See more about that on our mobilehomecoming.org website. That's something that we're really excited about.
The book is Spill, Scenes of Black Feminist Fugitivity. The intellect that brought it into the world is Alexis Pauline Gumbs. Thank you as always for joining us on Left of Black, Alexis.
Thank you so much.
Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts. And every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot. All black everything, everything black. Culture over everything.